60% mental and 40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. Of course, I'm joined as I am every week with Braden Moles and Keaton Maisano. Your Buckeyes are Big Ten East champs. They are Indianapolis bound after a 28-17 win over Penn State. Now the Buckeyes have to turn their attention to Michigan, but, we're not ready to go to that yet, so we're going to talk about the game that was, a lot of good, a lot of bad, but they really got that test that they needed, I think.
I think this was an important game, not only in the sense that Ohio State is finally getting to, play a great opponent and compete for a Big Ten championship, but being able to kind of play against some of that adversity that, while they've received minimal doses at times against, Wisconsin and even early against Miami of Ohio. But, a game like this is great for them to finally have their backs pushed against the wall and, finally having to, seeing Ryan Day trying to coach his way out of some issues really for the first time this season.
Yeah, and it was an extremely stressful situation. I mean, it turned around pretty quickly. It was 21-0. It really looked like the game was going to be heading in a direction that would be an even bigger Ohio State blowout with Clifford going down. So I think the way that the game kind of turned real quickly was a big moment for Ryan Day and his team because they could have easily rolled over. I mean, it's been easy for them all year. This is the first time they've really been in a situation where the momentum is totally shifted, and it happened in the biggest game of the year with the Big Ten East on the line. This is the game you can't lose, and they were able to respond. The defense really stepped up, shutting out Penn State in the final 4 possessions, and then the offense got that timely score to put the game back to 2 possessions, which was big.
Yeah, turnovers definitely the key here. Ohio State had a fumble going into the end zone with Justin Fields. They initially ruled it a touchdown. They went up to the replay. It was pretty obvious that it was a fumble, and then a couple of back-to-back fumbles in the in their own end, and Penn State was able to turn that around into some points and really put some fear in the 104,000 fans that were here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, these kind of mistakes are something we haven't really seen from Ohio State this season. I mean, Justin Fields has had his fair share of fumbles and even an interception earlier this season, but it was very uncharacteristic seeing Ohio State turn the ball over like this. I mean, ball security is something that Ryan Day has preached from pretty much the first day he got here because that has always been kind of getting those possessions has always been a big tenet of what he wants to do here, especially with the offense. So I think, like I said, it was uncharacteristic seeing that from them, but I think they responded well, especially considering that especially the second fumble, I'm pretty sure his knee was down, but it didn't seem like there was enough clear evidence to overturn it. So I think it was a nice response from them, even though you'd rather them not have the turnovers there.
Yeah, and I think this kind of just proves how valuable having a well-rounded team is. I mean, offenses is kind of what carries the day in college football, but there's going to be times where your offense isn't able to perform at its peak capacity, and that was what happened to Ohio State in the third quarter. They really kind of shot themselves in the foot, and they had to lean on their defense. This is the kind of game that I think if the offense played like they had last year, in last year's situation with the defense, they probably don't win this game. So it's okay sometimes to not be able to win the game well-rounded, especially late in November. If some other unit has to step up, it's all about just winning the game, with every game being a top 25 matchup from here on out. It's just about surviving and advancing for Ohio State.
Exactly, and we'll talk about Ohio State's offense here in a minute, but, let's talk about the defense. And Chase Young comes back, and he makes himself very welcome on the field. Great stat line for him. He had 4 TFLs, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. Probably could have had a couple more. He was held early, often, all the time. Speak on Chase Young.
I think it was easy to, this may sound weird considering he's probably the best player in college football, but it was kind of easy to forget that he wasn't there against Rutgers and Maryland because, Ohio State's defensive line was still putting in a lot of work over those 2 games. I believe it was 8 sacks over those 2 games. But, coming back to this game and this big premier opponent, similar to the Wisconsin game, Young really stepped up in a big moment for Ohio State. I mean, he, like I said, his contribution on the field wasn't really missed with the previous 2 games, but it could not be overstated how much of an impact he had today with those 3 sacks and really helping stop some of Penn State's momentum when Ohio State was having those turnovers on offense.
Yeah, and this defense is solid without Chase Young. But with Chase Young, this defense is very scary. And I think even Kevin and I were talking about it. It's hard not to just, glue in on Chase Young when he's on the field. I mean, there's 10 other guys on the field, but you're looking at number 2 the entire time because it feels like he's winning his matchup every time. And it was really Penn State really struggled with that. They moved him around a little bit, but he was able to just make an impact. And it almost seems impossible for a guy at his position to consistently wreck a game. I mean, his 2 best games have come against the two best opponents Ohio State has played, and it's just going to be really interesting to see how he plays down the stretch. I mean, it feels like he's getting better, which is scary for a lot of offenses, but, I mean, the sky's the limit for this guy.
Ohio State knocked Sean Clifford, the Penn State quarterback, out of the game. They end up bringing in Will Levis, a redshirt freshman quarterback, and the tone changed a little bit there. I mean, obviously they were aided by the turnovers that the Buckeyes had committed there, but, it really did kind of seem to change things when Penn State had, 60 yards in the first quarter, really were not able to get anything with the run, and then you end up bringing a quarterback that seems to be much more of a run-first type of guy, and even though Ohio State have seen the zone read, they can see it all the time in practice, it's different when you're going up against a team in a different colored jersey.
I think Sean Clifford is a really good quarterback. I mean, it's hard to deny that considering the performances he's had this year. But it really was undeniable, the difference in Penn State's offense when Will Levis came in. I mean, obviously he benefited from a couple of short fields off of Ohio State's turnovers, so he never really had to drive the length of the field. And when he did, it wasn't very pretty. But in Penn State's a couple of big scoring drives, I mean, he had some nice runs and was really able to help Penn State stay in the game. And it is interesting. Someone brought this up in the postgame press conference, but this is kind of the year of seeing backup quarterbacks have to come in relief and just doing really well. I mean, you had that earlier this season with Kedon Slovis for USC coming in for JT Daniels. And I mean, there have just been other examples this year, like with Indiana having to go back to their backup quarterback. You just have a lot of backup quarterbacks coming in and doing really well as a kind of change of pace when their offense isn't going very well. Yeah,
and kind of talking about what Braden kind of mentioned there is, I think you can't undervalue how much the other 10 players will step up their game when they lose their quarterback, because you're having a new guy come in and it feels like everybody else is playing a little bit better once that happens. And Penn State benefited from the fact that I don't think Ohio State had a lot of film on Levis, so he was able to bring a different kind of style that they weren't probably prepared for. And also when you have the positive momentum that keeps rolling, it's like you're just going downhill. And Penn State was able to score when he first came in, and then they got the 2 quick turnovers. So it really felt like everything was going right for Penn State. And then unfortunately for the Nittany Lions, he ended up throwing a costly interception to Justin Hilliard late in the game. But, I mean, you're really impressed with how he played, and especially the physical running style that he had. It's just something Ohio State hadn't seen yet this year. So that's something that they'll have to probably game plan for going forward.
I agree on all those points. We will switch gears and talk offense here on the other side of this break.
Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com.
Welcome back to the BIA show. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. We're talking about the 28-17 win for the Buckeyes against Penn State, clinching the Big Ten East. Definitely a running type of game. 61 rushes for 229 against the nation's number 4 rush defense. Penn State have been allowing fewer than 80 yards a game. It definitely seemed like the Buckeyes made their decision that they were going to try and win this on the ground, and they had a lot of success.
I mean, I think this is the third time this season that Ohio State has gone up against the best rushing defense in the Big Ten, obviously besides themselves because they can't play against themselves. But, a season high in attempts for J.K. Dobbins and Justin Fields. So I think, they didn't have quite the success against Penn State that they had against some of the other, Wisconsin and Michigan State that they played earlier this season. But I still think, especially that first drive where they went, I believe it was 91 yards on the ground and on 12 rushes. That was just a back-breaking drive for Penn State because, coming into the game, that was the big narrative that Justin Fields might have to air it out a little bit more because, Penn State's rushing defense would shut down Ohio State. But, that was not the case. And Ryan Day and the coaching staff made it clear early on that they were not afraid to challenge Penn State on the ground.
Yeah, and in the past few years, even under Urban Meyer, really outside of last year, this is a team that when the going gets tough, they want to run the ball. Their identity isn't to try to pass themselves out of like tough situations, and they have the best rush offense in the country. So I think they were going to lean on what they did well. They weren't going to adjust to something that Penn State did well. They're going to go right at Penn State. They weren't going to try to avoid their strength, and it really paid off for Ohio State. I think they really had the mindset to play physical early, and that's something that we hadn't seen from them in the first quarter. Like against Michigan State, it took a little bit of time for the offensive line to get going, but they were ready right from the start of the game to attack Penn State. J.K. Dobbins, really outside of the fumble, looked very solid, and it really was kind of tough sledding for Ohio State on the inside at parts of that game. They were able to find some success on the outside, and then Justin Fields, really in the quarterback draw game, was able to break Penn State's back a few times. So that was just, they got production from two guys, but in two different ways.
I mean, let's, be honest here. There was 61 carries, 229, a 3.8 yard per carry average. Probably not where they want to be. You want to see that north of 4, preferably around 5. But, a lot of credit to Penn State and what they were doing out there. Micah Parsons was flying around. They played very well on that side of the ball. As for the Ohio State passing game, they didn't ask too much out of it. 22 attempts, 16 completions, a $188, a couple of touchdowns. Justin Fields definitely had an up and down day. I mean, he didn't make a lot of bad throws. I mean, I think we can sit there and kind of double back on the fumble and some things along those lines. But when it came to throwing, I mean, he made some difficult throws, and guys like KJ Hill and Chris Olave were out there to answer.
I mean, I think throwing was obviously based on the number of carries here. It certainly was not the focus for Ohio State, with Fields only having one more passing attempt than he did carries on the ground. But I think, Fields, like I'd said earlier, I mean, there were some uncharacteristic mistakes from him in this game, with the 3 fumbles, 2 of them lost, and then the one throw to Chris Olave that probably should have gotten picked off, but Olave was able to break up the pass. So I think, this type of game, Ryan Day said post-game that he kind of talked with Justin this week that this was going to be a game where they would have to put everything out there, and Fields was okay with that, and what that meant was not making his money through the air, but on the ground this week. And I think, despite the 3.8 yards per carry as a team, I think Fields was still able to really excel on the ground, where they didn't really need him as much in the passing game this week.
Yeah, and that one throw that Braden alluded to with the one where he underthrew Olave, and Olave really had to fight, almost play like a defensive back, almost actually stole it for a good catch. But kind of in contrast to that one, the throw that he had to KJ Hill for the touchdown, like, he could not have handed the ball to him any better. And I think a lot with the passing game is a lot about rhythm, and I don't think Ohio State really had that kind of rhythm with the passing game ever. But they were able to produce when they needed to. He was able to put the ball in a spot where his playmaker, Chris Olave, can make a play to put the team back up 2 possessions, which was important. But, yeah, the focus for Fields is definitely with his legs, especially in just ad-libbing some stuff in the running game, especially on the crucial third downs to kind of break Penn State's back. I mean, you can have the right defensive call. You can cover all the wide receivers, but when you have an athlete like Fields in the backfield and he can just create something and get an extra first down, I mean, that's got to just break the back of a defense. And if he can continue to do that, Ohio State can be almost unguardable as long as they don't turn the ball over like they did in that third quarter.
I mean, that's what it's going to come down to. I was asked a lot of times this week in interviews, what is it going to take for Penn State to pull off the upset? And I said, well, Ohio State would have to be -3, -4 in the turnover battle. But then you sit there and you look and you see Ohio State, massively outgains Penn State, puts it on the ground 3 times, one on sure points. I mean, they fumbled as they were crossing the goal line. A couple of, short fields there, and Ohio State still has an 11-point win. So, certainly Ohio State had its issues today, but I mean, it just wasn't enough for anybody to get past them. And Penn State's a top 10 team and arguably the number 2 team in the Big Ten. I haven't seen anything else out there to convince me otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was, like you say, it was not a pretty game for Ohio State, but I think this is the type of game they needed at this point in the year, because going against Maryland and Rutgers, there really isn't anything you can take away from those performances, good or bad. You have the Garrett Wilson fumble against them, but in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. But these types of mistakes, the fumbles and the near interceptions against Penn State, that's stuff that will matter, especially as the season progresses and you're going up against Michigan and either Minnesota or Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game now, and then a potential playoff match. This is the type of game where you can really see what your team is made of against a good opponent. As Day said, a talent-equated team in Penn State. So I think this was an important game for them to figure out, kind of as they go into this final stretch, what they really needed to work on.
Yeah, and you can build confidence in 2 ways. You can build it by playing very well and just seeing proof in the pudding almost. And you can also build it on overcoming adversity, and that's what Ohio State did today. They really had their backs against the wall with everything on the line. They were able to respond, and Ryan Day talked about the lessons they learned, probably obviously holding on to the football, being able to respond with the game on the line late in the fourth quarter. And then really Josh Myers also talked about how they just kind of shot themselves in the foot, but that they're going to learn and move on from that and just work on ball security. And I think the fact that Ohio State was able to almost slow the tide, because all that happened in like 2 minutes of game time. So really take away that, Ohio State dominated this game. And I think going forward, Ohio State now has the confidence that if they get put back into a position where the game's close, and I think that it'd be hard-pressed not to be in that position, especially with their opponents coming up, they're going to know that they can respond in those situations because they've done it in the past.
We're going to have a special BIA podcast later this week talking about Michigan, so we're not going to get too far ahead of ourselves here. So we're just going to wrap this one up here with final thoughts.
Like I said, I think this was a great win for Ohio State. I mean, this is something kind of they've been looking for all season, because they've had those games against Michigan State and Wisconsin where they come in, they're playing, a good team, as some would say a great team maybe in Wisconsin, but, they blow them out, and then really after the fact, nobody really cares about it. But now this win, clinching the Big East title, that really gives this team something to rest their laurels on. There's obviously a lot of season left. This is really, Ryan Day can now hold up that Big East title and kind of show that, the first however many games where they won by 24 points, it's not just a fluke. This team is really putting something together this season.
I'll use my final thoughts to talk about 3 players from my favorite position group on this team, which is the linebackers. Pete Werner really did a good job defending Freiermuth the entire game. I mean that's a tough ask for anybody, especially a guy of his talent, his size, and able to move. So I thought he did a very good job. Baron Browning, who I've been a very big advocate for throughout the entire season, he really showed up, made some good plays, made a sack, had a play where I think he really spooked the wide receiver into dropping a pass that he would have probably broken up himself on a third down. And then the final player is Justin Hilliard. What a story for him. Really kind of gets here, very highly recruited player, kind of doesn't go his way. Injuries happen, doesn't really get playing time, but makes a big-time interception in the fourth quarter. So that was just kind of a good thing to see for Ohio State.
And my final thought is about Jonathan Cooper, who is going to redshirt this year and be back for an additional year next year. That's going to be huge for these Buckeyes, as they're going to lose a lot of guys to the NFL, especially draft-eligible juniors like Chase Young. So I think that is a huge win for this team. And you know what? If they win 4 more games, we may see a mass exodus if everybody has a title at that point. But we're not going to get ahead of ourselves. That is for another time, another date. We're going to end the show today. 28-17 Buckeyes win. They are going to Indianapolis. Make your reservations now. If you go to St. Elmo, remember that the shrimp cocktail is very spicy. For Kevin Noon, Braden Moles, and Keaton Maisano, thank you for listening to BuckeyeGrove.com, and we will catch up with you soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game. Exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.